Welcome to Paranormal Almanac with your host, Kurt Sandvik. That's right. Welcome. I'm your host, Kurt Sandvik, and welcome to another edition of Paranormal Almanac. And on this edition, let's talk about the Mammoths. But first, as always, we've got shout-outs. Shout-outs go down to the patrons. I love the fact that there have been new complaints. Can this guy just get into an episode? First, he says a bunch of people's names I don't understand, and then he talks about shit that has nothing to do with what the episode's called. Yep, my show. Always going to do shout-outs to the patrons because without them, there would be no show. So shout-outs to Sophie Alice, the Babster, your local cryptid, Falori. Hold on, I just realized I am nowhere near the button I need to do my... There, I'm close enough. Falori, Naughty Innuendo, Jen, Danny, Dark Cipher from Australia, Sarah Jane Oxley, Angie, Lisa Cervantes, Curious Hedgehog, Diana, Mr. J, George Berg, Casey the Pitbull, and all the pups, including Stitch, Deb B, GC, Tracy, Newt MacGyver on it, B Melty, Avril, Loch Ness, not a monster, still the little photo, whatever, on Patreon, still looks like boobs to me. Stacy, Leviathan, Stiggy, and Chani the Palmy. Hey, howdy, hi. JT, Doogie Whore, Mike G, Tracy B, Jeff, Richard, Alec, Karen, Duran, Lori, Rebecca, Ann, Stephen, Cher, hey, howdy, hi. Jane Ann, Jennifer, Heather G, Zuzus, What's It, Paula, Nico, Cher, and the mouse, all the cats and dogs and all the pups. I love y'all. Thank you so much. Tina, Mark and Tina, Tortuga, Alabama White Thang, Andy, Virginia Mailman, Tony the Magician, Vicky, Crow, Isabel, Jen, Amber, Tracy, Sandy, Paige, Kaush, Scott, Andrea, Vanessa, If I Was the Devil, Elizabeth, Sherry, hey, howdy, hi, Art Muffin, Tim, East, Clintwood, Kenneth, Alexandra, Zozo the Demon, Hayden, Cindy, Ashley, Robin, Lauren, Phil, that's Indiana, Russell, Isabel, Audra, Dorian, Cindy, Jerry, Jeff T, Lawrence, the Lawrence Strawn, hey, howdy, hi, thank you once again. Rum is actually literally playing with the Nessie as we speak. Veronica, Autumn, Carolyn, Nanashi, Todd, Jamie, and Elijah Hendrickson. Haven't seen them in a while. I want to hang out with them. Dan, Laura Pitts, and the one, the only, the amazing Gamer Fan. Plus, I just got back from Mail Call. Now, I've not opened it yet, but I have a package right here that says from Russell Mylott. That's right. I've got a package. I can't wait to open it. I was going to open it on air, but trust me, when you see how long this episode is going to be, you're going to be like, yeah, you got enough stuff to worry about. But I cannot wait. Thank you so much, Russ. That's amazing. That's so freaking cool. I haven't even opened it yet, and I'm already so excited. Thank you all for everybody who sends me stuff, even the cards and the encouraging words that I've been getting lately. I cannot thank you all enough. 3 special shout-outs. Joe Teague, my boy Stitch, and pour one out if you're drinking one. Pour one out for the old house. My old house. The house that I did just about every episode on up to past, 10 months. Yeah, they have completely gutted that house. It is a shell of a house. There's no floors. There's no walls. There's no ceiling. There's just the shell, the outer shell of the house. No windows, no doors. It's gone. Sadly, it hit me harder than I thought it was going to hit me because I didn't own the freaking house, but I lived there longer than I lived anywhere else in my life. But that house, sadly, is no more. I am going to do a very, very, very quick paranormal news. Again, you're about to find out why this episode took a bit longer to come out. It was a lot of work over the past few months to sift through everything to find and organize this into an episode. It was a mammoth episode, a mammoth taking, if you will, undertaking, if you will. It was, see, it's because it's about mammoths. It was a lot is what I'm saying. But first, let's get to paranormal news. Man, I love this tune, Buzz. It's so good.
Have you ever seen Bigfoot riding on the back of Nessie while being sucked up into the sky by a UFO, all to the soundtrack of a choir of ghost cats, being led by a black-eyed child? Is this story true? Well, there's only one place you're going to find out. Get all my news from paranormal news. Listen carefully for the clues. The stories are strange and bizarre. It makes you wonder just who we are. This is paranormal news. Paranormal news. There's something in the shadows. Take it away, Kurt.
Okay, Buzz. Again, great freaking tune, dude. Alrighty, this has been a weird couple of weeks for stuff that I wanted to throw in an episode for Paranormal News. There's a new story you're about to hear about D.B. Cooper. There's a new story that's not new to anybody who's ever listened to me talk about Amelia Earhart, but there's a new Amelia Earhart story that I'm not going to include on this episode. It's old news as far as I'm concerned, but this D.B. Cooper, well, that's new news. First story in Paranormal News, a man waited until his mom died to reveal her bombshell secret. She helped D.B. Cooper disappear. That's right, after 54 years, a supposedly, they say a credible revelation, but I'm saying a supposedly credible revelation may unmask the mystery man behind history's greatest unsolved skyjacking. That's right, the case of D.B. Cooper. Happened, if you don't know what D.B. Cooper is, he was a skyjacker. It really was Dan Cooper. The news got it wrong and marked him as D.B. Cooper, but he said his name was Dan Cooper on Northwest Orient Flight 305, November 24th, 1971. He parachuted into the night and disappeared with $200,000. There's been a lot of theories, a lot of theories, but a man says he knows the true identity of D.B. Cooper because the confession came from his mother on her deathbed. Now, Richard Rick McCoy III isn't claiming his mom was D.B. Cooper, but his father, Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., a Vietnam veteran and a seasoned skydiver, he is saying was D.B. Cooper. That's right. He says that his mother, Karen McCoy, who stood as his father's accomplice. She alleged that she had assisted in orchestrating not just the most notorious skyjacking, but also an additional one, confessing she helped plan both of the heists. Let's see. He's dead. How'd he die? Let's get to the part. Richard McCoy's skyjacking on April 17th, 1972 led to his quick capture just 3 days later after his arrest. Richard was sentenced to 45 years in prison, but escaped after 2 years and was killed in 1974 in a shootout with cops in Virginia. According to the report, Rick has even provided DNA samples to the FBI in hopes of finally resolving D.B. Cooper's mystery. He said he had previously refrained from collaborating with the Bureau, choosing to wait until after his mother's death in December of 2020. But it's going to take much more than just a confession to convince, well, me and everybody else, but another possible wrinkle, another possible suspect in D.B. Cooper. That's way cool. And like I said, there was a story about Amelia Earhart and what happened to her. Yeah, it was crabs. We all knew it was crabs. Her bones got scattered. The skeleton disappeared. Old news. So, up next in paranormal news, former U.S. Air Force general who is linked to UFO research goes missing in New Mexico. That's right, the disappearance of Air Force veteran William Neal McCaslin sparks concerns. The sheriff's office appeals to public for information on his whereabouts. He is a retired U.S. Air Force general who spent part of his career engaged in UFO research. He's disappeared in New Mexico. 68-year-old William Neal McCaslin was last seen around 11 a.m. local time on Friday near Quail Run, northeast in Albuquerque. According to the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office. His wife said he had left home without his watch or phone, which is considered unusual for a man known to be an experienced outdoorsman with a passion for hiking and skiing. The sheriff's office said a silver alert has been issued, indicating particular concerns for his well-being because he suffers from an unspecified medical condition. I hope he is found safe and sound. I don't think it was anything paranormal or, government conspiracy connected to what he researched back in the day for UFOs, but I hope he's found safe and sound. All righty, another quick one. I don't even have the full story. I'm just going to read you the headline. A third party objects to Conjuring House guardianship request. That's right. Another person who was reportedly given power of attorney is saying that she objects to the guardianship proceedings in a Boston probate court. So still a lot of fuzzy stuff, shall we say, going on with the Conjuring House, but that's all I'm going to talk about. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with a very long episode. We are back. On this edition, let's talk about one animal and one animal only. An animal that did exist. But does it still exist? But does it? Come on, Kurt. An animal that did exist, but does it still exist? See, that's so much better. Over the years, I've briefly mentioned the woolly mammoth here or there, but I decided it needed its own episode. It's a freaking woolly mammoth. They are iconic, well, I almost said dinosaurs, but they're not dinosaurs. They are iconic, not dinosaurs. What the crap do you call? Oh, this episode's starting off great. What do you call a woolly mammoth? They are an iconic prehistoric mammal? That doesn't sound cool enough. They're an iconic. I don't freaking look. They're effing woolly mammoths. Every kid dreamt, I would assume, of riding woolly mammoths because they're just freaking ginormous, hairy elephants. But when did they die out? Did they die out? Could they have survived? Why aren't they in any Jurassic World movies, even though they aren't technically dinosaurs? I figured that part out by myself. All these questions, and I'm sure there's going to be way more, are all on this edition of Paranormal Almanac. Now, first, just in case someone out there doesn't know what a woolly mammoth is, I mean, how could you not? How do you find your way home from work, people? Look, if you don't know what a woolly mammoth is, well, no, I'm not going to go there. Let's just get this out of the way first. What is a woolly mammoth? The woolly mammoth, or Mammothus primigenius, is an extinct species of mammoth that lived from the Middle Pleistocene until its extinction in the Holocene epoch. That doesn't help me at all. And I'm pretty sure I didn't say Pleistocene or epoch or epoch. How do you say epoch? Is it epoch? I think it's epoch. I don't know. I don't want to get yelled at this early in an episode, so let's find out how. Epoch. What? Hold on. It's not epic. It's got an H on. Whatever. I don't care. Look, that doesn't help me at all. So what is a mammoth? Well, let me tell you my definition of a mammoth. A mammoth is a big freaking elephant with long woolly hair that died out technically between 14,000 and 11,500 years ago. Yeah, not that long ago. Now, scientists are divided over whether hunting or climate change led to the extinction of a woolly mammoth, which led to the shrinkage of its habitat. Was the main factor that contributed to the extinction of a woolly mammoth people or the planet? Or was it a combination of the two? Or could they still be out there? Also, a small population of woolly mammoths survived on St. Paul Island in Alaska around 5,600 years ago. And the last known fossil population remained on Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean until about 4,000 years ago. So we keep getting newer and newer dates of when they supposedly died. But before I get into are they still alive, let's pause right here for the first cool fact. And I think I've said it before on previous episodes, but it's just too cool not to share again. Mammoths lived at the same time as the pyramids. Think about that. I know, like I said, I learned this a long time ago. I know I've said it on previous episodes. It still wrinkles my brain, man. It sounds weird, but it's true. Because woolly mammoths lived on Wrangel Island and St. Paul Island, by the way, populations of them on Wrangel Island and St. Paul Island, and the population size and the actual size of the mammoths themselves shrank down. It's known as island dwarfism. And because of that, woolly mammoths were able to survive as long on that island, roughly 1/10 the size of Wrangel Island, the St. Paul Island I talked about. And the mammoths died out 500 years before the Wrangel Island mammoths did. So again, now we're down to 4,000 years ago. So that is a very long-winded way of saying the pyramids of Giza, which were constructed 2600 to 2500 BC, were already several centuries old when the last mammoth supposedly, I'm air quoting by the way, died out. Again, that kind of stuff wrinkles my brain, man. There were mammoths walking the earth after the pyramids were built. And I will say, I will actually talk about the Egyptians and mammoths later, so spoilers. And no, I do not think the mammoths built the pyramids or were used to help build the pyramids. Let's get that right out of the way, because that's one of those things that if people were to, do sensationalistic headlines about this episode, that's what they would grasp onto. Kurt's obviously saying they use mammoths to build the pyramids. No, I'm not. Didn't say that. Won't say that. Spoiler, will never say that. Well, I don't know about never. If they prove me wrong, cool. That's an awesome fact, and it'll wrinkle my brain too. But I'm not saying that on this episode. But since I mentioned them, here is another fun pyramid fact. Studies have determined that many of Egypt's pyramids contain hundreds of thousands of marine fossils in the limestone, including whale fossils, dugong fossils, and a bunch of like coin-shaped little critter fossils. Not done learning yet, because the first spinosaur fossil ever found was found in Egypt by the pyramids by a German paleontologist in 1912, but sadly, the fossil was destroyed during a bombing raid on Munich in 1944. When I got to that fact, I went, one day I want to do a whole episode about all the cool stuff that got destroyed because of World War II, but not today. That did lead me down some dumb timeline tables about the pyramids, that things that are older than the pyramids. Most of them, it's obvious, but this one I thought was actually kind of neat. So just here's one more thing about the pyramids. Cleopatra, she lived closer in time to the moon landing than to the building of the Great Pyramid. See, that stuff is cool. I try to teach you guys some stuff besides just making like dumb dick jokes and talk about Bigfoot and stuff and don't effing shoot them. I try to teach you guys some hopefully new stuff that you haven't heard. Learning is, knowledge is power, right? Isn't that what they say? But this isn't a pyramids episode, despite what you might think so far, because I'm like 19 minutes into it, and basically all I've talked about are pyramids. This is a woolly mammoth episode. So again, officially, woolly mammoths died out around 4,000 years ago. Not 15,000, not 11,000, not 5,000, 4,000 years ago. That leads me to my question for this episode. Then why the hell have so many people seen them? Seriously, let's get into mammoth sightings and early writings that talk about mammoth sightings before their fossils were ever even discovered. And I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, This is dumb. You probably have one or two sightings from a long time ago from a distance that doesn't prove anything or doesn't really talk about mammoths. Oh, yeah? Well, buckle up, baby. First up, and I will say this is a grain of salt one, but it's from so freaking long ago, there is no possible way they would have known about mammoths. But the first one is from the Han Dynasty, a historian named Sima Qian, from 145 to 86 BC. Sima Qian wrote that Siberia was home to, quote, northern elephants covered in bristles and also northern rhinoceroses. So, not a direct mammoth mention, sure, but no elephants should have been in that area. And the whole covered in bristles isn't something that is typically mentioned when describing elephants. His records indicate that these elephants were used for labor, warfare, and a source of ivory during the early Han Dynasty and earlier periods. So, here are records of possible mammoths where there shouldn't have been anything mammoth-like. And again, way before the fossil records of mammoths were even found. Then, there are tales from 579, so we're jumping ahead a little bit, 500 years, of Chinese hunters that, quote, caught the great elephant and killed it. But, of course, no body or skeleton still exists, but these stories were written about them catching the great elephants and the size of these beasts and the fact that they were all, again, covered in hair. Pretty weird. Moving forward, let's jump ahead again. Moving forward. Let's jump to around 1486. The hell was that? Hello? Alexa, nobody is talking to you. Please stop. What the crap? Sorry. Anyhow, she just started talking. All right. Anyhow, we're going to jump around 1486. So quite a big gap in mammoth stories that I can find, but I will say there are a lot of grain of salt online stories about books that have been discovered from like the 13th century that mention mammoths, but there wasn't enough details for me to go, I think this is real, because sadly, the internet has a lot of misinformation, and boy, howdy, that's just getting worse. Anyhow, let's move to, his name is Sigismund von Herbenstein. He was alive from 1486 to 1566. He was a diplomat of the Holy Roman Empire and wrote extensively on Russia. Not surprisingly, a ton of mammoths still being alive stories have to deal with Russia and Siberia, so you're going to hear a lot about those, spoilers. But this guy, Sigismund, he wrote that locals name-dropped an animal called Wes, W-E-S. Wes was a member of the existing Siberian fauna. And yes, I will say, skeptics, I'm going to give you a shout out right now. So for you skeptics, he does not describe what Wes looked like in his writings. But it was later established that the name Wes is applied in Western Siberia to a mammoth-like animal and pretty regularly by locals at that time and later. So, based on locals' descriptions, the word Wes equals mammoth. Not a question anywhere. So, yes, skeptics, technically, Sigismund does not say, and the Wes looked like a giant woolly mammoth. No. But everything from the locals written at that time and up to a couple of hundred years later by those same locals describe Wes as a mammoth. All right, cool. We get that? There's your shout out, skeptics. Then we go to 1567 and 1568 to David Ingram. Now, in 1567 and 1568, explorer David Ingram basically walked across much of North America. Again, it was pretty boring time, so he just kind of Forrest Gumped his way one day and just started walking. During his trek, he was apparently him and his people were like basically abandoned for a bit, so they had nothing else to do but trek around. But during his trek, he reported seeing elephants and claimed that natives made horns out of their teeth, which I deep dove that part because I didn't understand it. And I think it's a mistranslation or a misquote, but there's a lot of things that say they made trumpets out of their teeth. I think he means they made horns or trumpets out of their tusks, or that the natives made things out of their tusks and the teeth. I don't know, but to me, that means that there should be museums in North America with ivory from North America that were made by modern mammoths and not fossilized. It should be very easy for them to tell that these are modern and not fossilized. But he said he saw, and he writes it really weirdly wording, both, B-O-A-T-H, elephantes and unces. What the hell is an unce? Well, I had to look that up. The latter term means large cats. So he saw both elephants and large cats in America. Let's pause right there. There are no elephants. And the large cats that he's referring to are very lion-like. There are no lions in North America. Very odd. He goes on to write, again, every word has extra E's and U's and O's, but I'll try and read it. This expedition did also see in those countries a monstrous beast twice as big as a horse and in every proportion like unto a horse, both in mane, hooves, hear, and neighing, save it was small towards the hinder parts like a greyhound. These beasts had 2 teeth or horns of a foot longer growing straight from their nostrils. They are natural enemies to the regular horses. So, a terrible description of an elephant or a mammoth, but something with two large, very long tusks growing out from their nostrils, enemies to the horses, smaller back side to the very large front half of the beast. Now, again, remember, there is nothing in upper North America, or basically any North America, that should look like an elephant at all. He goes on to describe this elephantes again and again and again. So he does know what an elephant looks like, and he says these things were like an elephant, but big and hairy, obviously with the mane and the hoofs and everything. Big and hairy, but an elephant with very long tusks. And I will say, let me pause right here to say, if you are screaming, Kurt, those are mastodons, not mammoths, stop. Trying to decipher or read stuff about this guy, especially David Ingram, they use the words mastodon and mammoths. They, both. They use them both. It's intertwined. It's in one sentence they'll say he saw a mastodon and that mammoth had huge. So let me briefly tell you the difference. Just stop, by the way. I'm going to say mammoths for this whole episode, but let me briefly tell you the difference between a mastodon and a mammoth. Mastodons were shorter, stockier, and lived in forests. Mammoths were larger, taller, and grazed in open plains. Mastodons had cone-shaped teeth for chewing. Mammoths had flat molars for grazing. Okay, we good? So I'm going to continue to say mammoth throughout this entire episode, even though, like I said, the terms mastodon and mammoth were pretty universally interchangeable in a lot of these stories, especially the very early ones. I'm just going to call them mammoths. And if you can prove to me 100% that he saw mastodons and not mammoths, well, my email is paranormalalmanac@gmail.com. But you got to show your work. And no, got to show your work is not a slang or euphemism for send me dick pics. Do not do that. Okay. Again, there are a ton of stories in North America, all of North America, about mammoths. There's also a Ponca oral tradition from Nebraska, of all regions, from that exact same time as David Ingram, so 1560s, about an elephant which they supposedly saw when they first settled on the Niobrara River. Sure, I've never been there. And it was still seen between the 15th and all the way through to the 18th century. So 300 years, oral stories were passed down generation to generation about tribes seeing elephants throughout the United States and in Canada. And I'm talking throughout. I'm including New England, the Great Lakes regions, the Rocky Mountains, Nebraska, you name it. People were seeing these ginormous elephants in North America. Again, no elephants are native to North America. Living elephants were mentioned in the stories of a variety of Native American tribes, particularly in the East, which surprised me. I thought it was going to be Pacific Northwest and, Great Lakes up, basically. But no, in the East. Although the animals were usually said to have since vanished at some point in the past, so between the 15th and 18th century, the stories were that these creatures were getting fewer and fewer and then had died out by the 18th century. Still, 18th century. Not 4,000 years ago. Now, living elephants were occasionally reported to exist in the American interior by some tribes from the 16th century to the early 19th century. It's insane how much the indigenous peoples were talking about coexisting with mammoths and what they did. Oral traditions from the Ponca people of Nebraska talk about elephants. Now, we know this because of a tribal historian man named Peter LeClaire. He said they told him directly, the tribes, the Ponca people of Nebraska, told him directly that these elephants were hairy, they were encountered alive and dead. And when the Ponca people first arrived, again, at that Niobrara River, it can't not be how it's pronounced, Niobrara, it's a dumb name, in northern Nebraska, basically the Great Plains region, he said the Ponca would go out on an annual bison hunt east before circling back to that river. During one of these early hunts, while traveling from Santee to Niobrara, a hunting party came across a dead Pasnuta. Pasnuta identified as elephant, or more precisely, hairy elephant, as well as a living water panther. The Ponca also allegedly saw a Pasnuta, the hairy elephant, alive in the region of what is now called Valentine, near a place called Twin Buttes. Now, according to different accounts, the elephant was either seen by a small waterfall or by a large spring, most often by a body of water or by a cave near bodies of water. Now, remember that, because that's going to pop up again and again and again. When you think of, or at least when I think of woolly mammoths, I don't think of them being in water, spending a lot of time in water. I think of them in snow and, forests or whatever, just tromping around like elephants. But no, in water is a very common thing. Again, by people who had no connection with each other around the world in the 15th and 16th and 17th and 18th and 19th century. You're going to hear these tales again and again and again. But they said that, these Ponca people said, the Pasnuta was alive. And another translation of Pasnuta that some people apply to the Ponca are a cannibal giant, which is odd because I don't have any stories really about mammoths eating other mammoths. I mean, there's some, mammoths attacking other animals, which you'll hear about, and people, which you'll hear about, but still I thought that was an odd one. Up next, though, I want to move forward just a little bit more To the 1580s, when the Stroganoff family sent a band of Cossacks to hunt down a group of bandits in Siberia. That's right. We're over in Siberia, like I warned you. Lots of these stories. The bandits had been stealing from their mines there. The leader of the expedition, a man named Yermak Timofeyevich, sure, it doesn't matter, he's dead, reported that beyond the Ural Mountains, or Ural Mountains, he met a large, hairy elephant. He described it exactly as that. In the 1580s, he saw a large, hairy elephant. Now, the natives told him that the kingdom of Sibir considered the giant animals as part of its wealth. They were valued as food and called mountains of meat. He said he personally saw meat, fur, and tusks at far-out markets where tribes were trading and eating fresh meat. Now, traveling through North America in the early 18th century, there was a French Jesuit named Pierre-François Xavier de Charlevoix. From 1680, he lived from 1682 to 1761. He heard stories from the Algonquin people of an enormous moose with the fifth arm coming out of its shoulder. So, terrible description of an elephant, but I get what you're saying. Charlevoix regarded this as unbelievable, but some later people that he talked to suggested, quote, the moose was an elephant, and its fifth leg, obviously, was the trunk. Look, when you tell me you saw an animal and it had a fifth leg, I'm not thinking trunk. But Charlevoix said, there's also a rather amusing tradition amongst these barbarians of a great moose, next to which the others are like ants. They say it has legs so high that 8 feet of snow do not hinder it. Its skin is proof against all sorts of weapons, and it has sort of arm coming from its shoulder that it uses as we do ours. It never fails to have a large number of moose following it that make up its court and that render it all of the services it requires of them. Now, again, it's a terrible, terrible, terrible description of an elephant or a mammoth, but if you've never seen an elephant or a mammoth, and again, North America, there aren't any, and it's the 1600s, late 1600s, early 1700s, so you don't really know of any. It's not a terribly terrible description. It's just not exactly accurate. Let's stick around that exact same time. The Chitimacha of Louisiana, they told stories of a long-nosed animal, but get this, the Chitimacha thought this large-nosed animal was actually brought to the Americas by the Europeans. And the reason they say this, people focused on this a lot online. I don't think they legitimately thought Europeans were traveling with mammoths. So everybody calm down. It was spotted at the same time that the Europeans were settling in America. They were moving out to new territories when they came across this long-nosed animal, and then right around that same time, they saw settlers. So they kind of just connected the dots. Maybe the settlers brought these weird things. The animal was said to come out of the sea around the same general time the Europeans really started coming over. And they said this long, large-nosed, huge animal that liked spending time in the water took up residence in a forest near what is now Charenton, Louisiana, and near what is now Marsh Island. Now, this supposedly occurred at around the same time that Europeans arrived in the New World, like I said, but around this same time, that's when the Chitimacha acquired firearms. So they were like, oh, we got to kill this freaking thing. They immediately sought out the animal, but it had disappeared by then. Kurt here, same rule applies to mammoths as to Bigfoots. Don't effing shoot them. But it said, a long time ago, a being with a long nose came out of the ocean and began to kill people. It would root up trees with its nose to get at persons who sought refuge in the branches, and people lived on scaffolds to get away from it. It made its home in a piece of woods near Charenton. And when guns were introduced, the people went into these woods to kill the monster. Kurt here, not a monster, but could not find it. When the elephant was seen, it was thought to be the same creature and was consequently called Neka Ki Kami. Mekalekahai Meka Neka Ki Kami, or long-nosed spirit. Interesting. But we got to keep on keeping moving here. So let's move on to the next one. We go to the city of Carencro in Louisiana. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right. I apologize. But we go to December of 1740. Now, the town takes its name from the carrion crow, or the buzzard. They said they named it because of the Atacapa Indians after a mammoth died in a nearby bayou or creek, which attracted thousands of buzzards. Here's the deal. I could not find a clear indicator of when this was supposedly to have occurred. But they're talking about it pretty commonly in December of 1740, so sometime prior to that. This first reference that I'm talking about appeared in the American Weekly Mercury on December 4th, 1740. 'Tis also advised from Louisiana that the natives advancing into some uninhabited countries found some elephants that had perished in a marshy place, which had given rise to a question whether this country does not border upon Asia, the rather because the natives say they never saw or heard that there were any animal of that kind in that country. So basically what it's saying is these natives have never heard of an elephant. But yet they're clearly describing elephants to the people of Louisiana, to the settlers of Louisiana. Now, it's not a long story, but again, Native Americans in Louisiana are talking about great elephants. And this one giant elephant that died in a nearby creek or bayou, and it just attracted thousands of buzzards. Weird. It's very odd. It should not happen. Now, according to a letter written by Martin Duralde, who is a commandant of Opelousas, who recorded much information on the peoples of Louisiana, this mammoth story was passed down at least a generation. So probably within 50 to 60 years prior to 1740. They said that the Atacapa people that they were talking to did not know the exact location that the mammoth died, and that the remains of the mammoth had supposedly been discovered in the bayou where they had seen, the buzzards and everything. So they said, it's over there in this bayou somewhere, but we don't know exactly where. So they couldn't dig it up. Basically, what they're trying to say is, at least back then, they were smart enough to go, all right, cool, show me this body. I want to see it. This guy, Martin Duralde, wrote, many years before the discovery of the elephant in the bayou called Carencro, an Atacapa savage had informed a man who is at present in my service in the capacity of cowherd that the ancestors of his nation transmitted to their descendants that a beast of enormous size had perished either in this bayou or in one of the other two watercourses a short distance from it, without their being able to indicate the true place, the antiquity of the event having without a doubt made them forget it. The fact realized as fact. So basically, he's saying one of his guys were talking to the locals. They told him this story. They said they knew the rough area, not the specific area, but again, mentions a ginormous size elephant. Now, he later wrote a more detailed letter describing the discovery of remains, which is very interesting. So, according to this one, which was published in the Transactions of the American Philosophical Society in 1809, he says, they discovered the bones shortly after 1760. So 20 years later, they found the bones right where they said they were going to be. But it's not a detailed description. It's basically what I just said. Hey, guess what? We found those bones that we were talking about 20 years ago. But still, very cool. We have it written and published in the Transactions of the American Philosophical Society in 1809 that they did indeed find mammoth bones in 1760 in Louisiana. That's flippin' crazy to me. What's even crazier? I'm now going to talk about Thomas Jefferson. That's right. Thomas Jefferson had an interest in the animals of America, including a bunch of animals that are supposedly never existed, like the American lion, but briefly mentioned mammoths. In his works, Notes on the State of Virginia from 1785, Thomas Jefferson recorded an account spoken directly from Native Americans to him about a, quote, big buffalo. Now, he said that it was also recorded in 1748 by a French officer named Fabry, which he thinks said it's a mammoth that he's talking about, but I want you to decide, are they talking about a mammoth in this Thomas Jefferson or French officer Fabry's account? In ancient times, a herd of these tremendous animals came to the Big Bone Licks and began a universal destruction of the bear, deer, elks, buffalo, and other animals, which had been created for the use of the Indians. The great man above, looking down and seeing this, was so enraged that he seized his lightning, descended on the earth, seated himself on a neighboring mountain, on a rock, of which his seat and the print of his feet are still to be seen, and hurled his bolts among them till the whole were slaughtered except the big bull, who, presenting his forehead to the shafts, shook them off as they fell, but missing one at length, it wounded him in the side, whereon, springing around, he bounded over the Ohio, over the Wabash, the Illinois, and finally over the Great Lakes, where he is living to this day. That's a lot to unpack. It's very legendy, but people think if you unembellish it, and I agree with this, if you unembellish what I just read to you, it talks about mammoths. They know exactly the other animals, bear, deer, elks, and buffalo. So we're not talking about buffalo. They're talking about things that were huge in comparison to buffalo, migrating north in smaller tribes. Now, are they really talking about a lightning storm that might have killed a bunch of mammoths? Yeah, maybe, but it sounds like some survived and then moved their way past Ohio, past Wabash, past Illinois, past the Great Lakes. So they're traveling north in smaller tribes. It's interesting. It's a little bit of a stretch, but it is interesting. I don't know. What do you guys think? I don't know. Thomas Jefferson's not around to ask him. He's not rapping about that. Anyhow, according to the lawyer and educator Nathan Guilford, the Potawatomi and the Shawnee west of the Great Lakes also talked about these mammoths, called them tree eaters, and described them as semi-aquatic, browsing animals with very long and curling tusks, a rough blue-gray hide, and large ears. Now, these Native Americans did not hunt the tree eaters, but they said they respected the beasts for clearing the forest, enabling them to plant maize or corn. I learned that from, TV commercials when I was a kid, and for their affectionate and docile nature. Now, Guilford said that the Native Americans who described to him riding tree eaters and of a baby tree eater too young to browse successfully to get, stuff off the trees, wandering down the Ohio Valley and actually being domesticated by a Shawnee chief. So now we're talking about Native Americans not only interacting with, not hunting, but interacting with mammoths and actually riding them, and a Shawnee chief domesticated a baby mammoth. That's insane. Again, nothing elephant-like in North America. And this is in the 1700s they're talking about it. Now, Thomas Jefferson also recorded a rumor from Native Americans that elephants were still to be found somewhere west of the Missouri River, and that on the authority of a certain Stanley, who had been captured by Native Americans near the Tennessee River, he said, a Mr. Stanley, taken prisoner by the Indians near the mouth of the Tennessee, relates that after being transferred through several tribes from one to another, he was at length carried over the mountains west of the Missouri to a river which runs westerly. That these bones abounded there, that the natives described to him the animal to which they belong as the still existing in the northern parts of their country, from which description he judged it to be an elephant. Hold on, that needs a... No way you can misinterpret that. This guy, who is a Native American prisoner and was just being, basically handed from tribe to tribe going west until they came across an elephant graveyard. That does not exist in North America or in the United States at all. That's insane to me. And again, 1700s. I know that was a long time ago, but it's not that long time ago. Then we go to this very quick story from Benjamin F. Stickney, who lived from 1775 to 1852, who was an Indian agent. He worked northwest of the Ohio, and he told geologist William H. Mather before 1843-ish of an Indian tradition which he believed referred to the mammoth. He said there was a tradition among the Indians of the existence of the mammoth. They were often seen. They fed on the boughs of a specific species of lime tree, and they did not lie down, but leaned against a tree to sleep. Again, none of these people should know anything about how elephants live, and they're describing it pretty damn accurately. Let's go on to 1811. During his 1811 travels in the Rocky Mountains, David Thompson discovered on January 7th, 1811, a very large footprint in the snow, which he insisted was an elephant track. Thompson himself, however, believed it could have been the track of a very large old bear, its claws worn down by age, but he said the track was huge. He said, continuing on our journey in the afternoon, we came on the track of a large animal. I measured it. 4 large toes, each of 4 inches in length, to each a short claw. The ball of the foot sunk 3 inches lower than the toes. The hinder part of the foot did not mark well. The length 14 inches by 8 inches. 14 by 8. Do bear prints? How? I don't know. Let's find out. What is the largest bear print? Kodiak bears or polar bears, not Kodiak bears. Polar bears tracks exceed 15 to 18 inches in length, but that's not the area that he's at. There are no polar bears down there. So a big ass print. Walking from north to south and having passed about 6 hours, we were in no humor to follow him. The men and the Indians would have it to be a young mammoth, and I held it to be the track of a very large, old, grizzled bear, yet the shortness of the nails, the ball of the foot, and its great size were not that of a bear. Otherwise, it has to have been, he's trying to justify it himself, it would have to have been a very large, old bear, his claws worn away. The Indians would not allow this. As the snow was about 6 inches in depth and the track was well defined, we could see it for a full 100 yards away from us. We did not attempt to follow it. We had no time for it, and the hunters, eager as they are to follow and shoot every animal, made no attempt to follow this beast. For what could the balls of our fowling guns do against such an animal of this size? The sight of the track of that large beast staggered me, and I often thought of it, yet never could bring myself to believe such an animal existed, but thought it must be the tracks of some monster bear. He's definitely trying to convince himself of that more than anybody else. But the Native Americans are like, that ain't no bear, that's a mammoth. Let's go ahead just a couple more years to 1818. That was 1811, by the way. Now we're at 1818. A man identifying himself only as P, so I already don't like it, wrote to Scott's Magazine reporting rumors of a very large animal in the Rockies, based on a sighting made in a remote valley by some fur traders whom P had interviewed. The animal was compared to an elephant in size, but its appearance was not described. This is what he wrote. The first party came suddenly upon the animal in a deep and formerly unvisited recess. They were so alarmed by its prodigious size. They were so alarmed by its prodigious size, exceeding that of the largest elephant, and its unknown aspect, that they immediately retreated in great consternation to the encampment from which they had been dispatched. After this sighting was first reported, a second party of traders was sent out to the same region, and yep, enormous cloven tracks were discovered. So, like, what the hell were they looking at? When did the first elephant show up in the United States? Let's find this out. I never thought to do this while I was doing this. All right. The first elephant arrived in the United States on April 13th, 1796 in New York. It was a 2-year-old female Indian elephant brought from Bengal, India, aboard the ship America, captained by Jacob Crowninshield. She was exhibited along the East Coast, including a viewing by President George Washington in Philadelphia. So 1796 is the first elephant. The second elephant arrived in 1804. There really weren't any elephants. And so this is 1811 and in a completely different area. Like, it doesn't make any sense is what I'm saying. None of this makes any sense. There are no elephants for people to have seen randomly. There is no escaped circus elephant or anything like that. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Moving to 1824, Captain Charles Stewart Cochrane reported seeing carnivorous elephants in the Colombian Andes. So not Siberia, not America. We're now in the Colombian Andes, which again, no elephants. He said he noted their strength and that they were difficult to track. Multiple people witnessed them. Captain Cochrane stated that nobody had been able to get close or kill one. Again, can we not? You see this really cool, amazing animal that's never been seen before. Don't freaking kill it. Similar reports exist around that exact same time around Lake Tota, where a water elephant was reported, sometimes explained as an optical illusion or as a large unknown animal, but the descriptions were always that of an elephant in the water. Okay, interesting. Then, written about in the Journal of a Residence and Travels in Colombia during the years 1823 and 1824. That's a terribly long title for a book. The Journal of a Residence and Travels in Colombia during the years 1823 and 1824. It says, the next recorded sighting or mention was around the same time as we go into the Tartar people, who are well known enough in Europe because of the writer Francois René de Chateaubriand, who wrote Voyage en America. And he had stories of the Tatars, or sometimes written as Tartars, that the mammoth was a burrowing animal. The Tatars also told another writer about this around that same time, named John Bell, of their stories with the mammoths, which he said, I do not believe you. There are no mammoths. There are no elephants. I don't know what you're talking about. But they described to him that this animal was described as alive and mobile, but also semi-aquatic. Rather than emerging from the earth, as he wrote it, they were saying that it came out from the waters. So basically, he misheard them or misquoted them and wrote it wrong. So Travels from St. Petersburg in Russia to Various Parts of Asia, Volume 2. That's right. First one was such a page-turner, he had to write Volume 2. John Bell finally included stories of mammoths. He wrote the Tartars tell many fables of it having been seen alive. I have been told by Tartars in the Baraba that they have seen this creature called mammon or mammoth at dawn of the day near lakes and rivers. But that on discovering them, the mammon immediately tumbles into the water and never appears in the daytime. They say it is about the size of a large elephant with a monstrous large head and horns, or tusks, in which he makes his way into marshy places and underground where he conceals himself till night. I only mention these things as reports of a superstitious and ignorant people. Okay, calm down. Kurt here. I don't think John Bell, or whatever the hell your name is, John Bell, I don't think you need to add the ignorant part. Guess what, John Bell? Compared to me, you're ignorant. How do you like that? And guess what? In another 50 years, when some chud finds this episode on some old iPod or something and listens to it and he talks about it on his Radiated podcast. He can call me ignorant. It doesn't matter. You don't have to go into that. These people aren't ignorant. They're seeing something, and just because you don't, no, I don't believe you, you're ignorant. Hey, man, the indigenous peoples, chances are they know what the hell they're talking about because they know what is around them. Anyhow, sorry, went off on an angry tangent. I just don't like it when people, even back then, call indigenous people ignorant. Guess what? They know well more about their land than you do, dickholes. All righty. Let's go on to the Irish explorer Ross Cox. He lived from 1793 to 1853. He worked for several trading companies. We're going back to northwestern America. That's right. He also collected stories of a very large animal from the Athabasca River region of the Rockies. He published this in 1831. He said the animal, which is said to have been driven into the mountains from the Great Plains by the Indians, was described as recently extinct. 1831, recently extinct, with a recorded sighting having occurred around 2 generations previously, so about 50 to 65 years. He said, some of the Upper Crees, a tribe who inhabit the country in the vicinity of the Athabasca River, have a curious tradition with respect to animals which they state formerly frequented the mountains. They allege that these animals were of frightful magnitude, being from 200 to 300 feet in length. Okay, I doubt that big. And in high proportion. That they formerly lived in the plains, a great distance to the eastward, from which they were gradually driven by the Indians to the Rocky Mountains. That they destroyed all similar animals, and if their agility was equal to their size, they would have also destroyed all of the natives. One man asserted that his grandfather told him he saw one of these animals in the mountain pass when he was hunting, and that on hearing its roar, which he compared to loud thunder, the sight almost left his eyes, and his heart became as small as an infant's. All right, so again, they're embellishing a bit, but if you kind of boil it down, yeah, they're talking about ginormous elephants. They describe them as ginormous elephants or elephant-type creatures. His grandfather. So chances are that dude was in his 50s at best, maybe 40s. And he's talking about having seen one alive in just prior to 1831, in probably early 1800s. So then we go to 1873 to an article in a thing called The Zoologist, in a magazine or booklet called The Zoologist. An article appeared in The Zoologist containing an interview with Cheriton Bachmachnik, who was a Russian convict who escaped from Siberia and claimed to have encountered living mammoths in the valley of the Alden Mountains. Cheriton Bachmachnik had been convicted of smuggling and had been sent to the mines of, I'm going to get this wrong, Narchinsk in Siberia. I think I got it right. You know what? Screw you. That's right, Narchinsk. Not only have I said Cheriton Bachmachnik and Narchinsk correctly, so give me some slack on the name of that weird river I was saying earlier. Anyhow, he escapes. He travels southward, heading for the Amur River in the hopes of reaching China. That's when he ran into a band of Cossacks, so he turns north. And he got to the gorges of the Alden Mountains when, winter arrived. Hey, man, winter's coming. The Game of Thrones taught me that. He was convinced he was going to freeze to death, so he said he followed herds of migrating animals hoping to find shelter. Instead, he found a hidden valley, hemmed in by cliffs on all sides, and he descended to find the valley to be warm and fertile. He said there was a lake, so he made camp beside it and lit a fire. Cut to night fell, and he hears some huge animals approaching that were attracted by the fire. And he's like, and he freaks out and he starts shooting pistols into the dark, causing a stampede. He says he stays up all night. Of course he did. Who's going to fall asleep then? He stays up all night, and when daylight came, he discovered large tracks and well-worn tracks leading to the water. So he goes to look for somewhere safer to shelter, to sleep finally, and he finds a cave. He enters the cave. Nope. there was a full-grown mammoth already living in the cave. He described the animal as 12 feet or 4 meters tall and 18 feet or 6 meters long. He said it was covered in reddish wool and black hair. The curving tusks were about 10 feet or over 3 meters long. In the coming days, Bachimachnik Cheriton saw about 20 mammoths in this valley. He said all were adults. He saw no calves. He said they were peaceable animals who were never aggressive to him. And indeed, he said they took little to no notice of him. Eventually, he leaves the valley. Kurt here, why? Why would you leave this warm, magical valley filled with mammoths that aren't trying to hurt you? But he does, and he found his way back to civilization. Boo! And on his return, the Russian officials seem to believe his story as they pardon him due to, quote, his services to science. What the crap, man? So I went down this rabbit hole, this Bachimachnik rabbit hole. I found the approximate location of the mines. The mines were real. That part is real. They had prisoners working the mines. That part is real. They're called the mines of Narchinsk. Narchinsk. That's all true. And if he traveled south, he would have been traveling towards China and the river he mentions, the Amur River. That's true. But to get to the Alden Mountains, they are like insanely far north, like weeks of travel far north. I mean, it's possible. He doesn't say how long he traveled. He said he was just following migrating animals to get away from the Cossacks, so he was forced to turn north to the gorges of the Alden Mountains. But officially, Cheriton Bachimachnik does not appear in the known historical records of the Narchinsk mines. But those records are far from complete. It's an insane story, and the more I looked into it, facts or data did match up. Still, it would be almost certain death to head north. Again, it never says how long he traveled north, so yeah, maybe. It's still an insane journey. And again, once I found that Mammoth Valley, yep, that's where I live now. I live in Mammoth Valley. Please don't come here. It's insane. Alrighty, from there, we go to 1890 to an article written by a Henry Tuchman about his killing of what he called the last mammoth in Alaska. And he says in this article that he donated the body to the Smithsonian. And I was like, holy shit, that's huge. That's huge. But I can tell you it was later debunked. He admitted it was fiction just to make some money. So, no. Sorry. Smithsonian is not withholding a mammoth body to go along with the giant skulls and the Bigfoot bodies and everything else people swear the Smithsonian's hiding. It's a known, debunked article. He said he made it up just to make some money. So, again, to all the websites that are still quoting this as fact, it didn't take me, I was going to say it took me like 5 minutes. It was longer than that. But it didn't take me long to debunk this, to find the proof that it was fake. Sorry, guys. But there's your first debunk of the episode, I think. Hey, let's jump to the early 20th century. To ethnologist Peter Alexeyevich Garatsov. He collected mammoth stories from the... Oh, I'm going to get so many things wrong in this. This part of the episode is going to be called, Kurt's about to say a lot of words wrong. So get over it. I'm trying my best here. I'm over an hour into this episode, and I'm getting to a big chunk of just Russian names. Peter collected mammoth stories from the Ostek Khanty, the Ab-Ugrian, and, I know this part, the Siberian Tatar people of the Western Siberia. Again, this time just east of the Urals, whom he found called the mammoth Ves this time, but not Wes, but basically This one, Vess or Wes, is corroborating that Sigemund's story that I told you a while ago. So a few hundred years later, basically, the people in the same basic area are saying, yes, we call them Vess. Yes, they are still here. Yes, they are mammoths. Here's what they look like. And he wrote that one often came across stories of live mammoths in Siberia, and that a description given by the Ugrians and the Siberian Tatars was, well, it was mammoth shape. I mean, it was a freaking mammoth. It was a mammoth, a big, hairy freaking elephant, tusks and all. He published this in his book in 1908. So we're already up to 1908, and he's getting current stories from people, from the indigenous people all over Russia, all saying, yeah, we got mammoths. Yep, they're still real. Yep, they're still here. Yep, they're still alive. Now, according to Peter, these West Siberian peoples describe the mammoth as a horned animal, but not a bull or an elk. Much, much larger. He does say with forked hooves, though, so okay, that part isn't mammoth-like, but I have found that these guys either mishear, misquote, or miswrite things often. I don't think they said forked hooves. I think they were talking about large toes. But again, they said it was habitually fondled and touched, that it habitually fondled and touched people with its long snout, but did no harm. That, Kurt here, that is very elephant-like. If you ever see like someone walking up to an elephant, that thing is like, you know, taking its I almost said tusks. No, it's taking its trunk and, you know, picking up people's hats and messing with people's hair and fondling people. They say that elephants find humans like cute up until the point where people start killing elephants, sadly. But that's what these people are saying back in 1908. That these ginormous elephants habitually fondled and touched people with its long snout, but did no harm. 1908, people are saying, yep, we got mammoths. Not we did, not my grandfather, not this is an oral story taught from generations before. 1908, they're talking about currently, we got mammoths. So, during an expedition to the Salim River region, and what is now known as, the Khanty-Mansi Autonomous Okrug of West Siberia, Peter collected mammoth stories, which he then published in 1911. This time from the Khanty people, who he described as having, the Khanty people described it as having long, thick hair and long horns or tusks. They told him that although mammoths were now very rare and difficult to find, they did exist in the forest, including a sacred forest named Kintusovskoye, which sadly I can't find, despite spending probably way too much time trying to locate it on a map. I really did. I was trying to find this sacred forest named Kintusovskoye in Russia, in Siberia, and I just can't find it. It's not on a local map. But they said they're rare. They still exist, but they're getting rarer. They live near and in rivers and lakes, and were said to be meek and peaceful, even friendly around people. So again, we're now up to 1911. They're saying currently, yep, we got them. They're just getting harder and harder to find in forests, spending time in rivers and waters. And again, we're generally friendly towards people. Okay. Then there are reports of there being a herd in the Nahanni Valley in Canada. And this is up into the late 1900s. That's our times now. Now we're getting into our times. Now still, I don't think they mean like 1980s. We're not there yet. We're still in the early 1900s, but they said late 1900s, not late 19th century. But they're saying you go deep enough in Canada, you're going to find them there, smaller numbers, but still. But I'm not up until the late 1900s yet. So let's get back to the early 1900s, back to Siberia. There was a report that came back saying that we found a tribe that were trading with explorers. Now, they said the natives were wearing woolly mammoth skins and furs and were eating freshly killed meat from a woolly mammoth they had just killed. So again, this is from 1915s, 1920s times. We're still getting indigenous people saying, yep, we got mammoths. There were apparently multiple mammoth sightings in North America by Westerners, but only up until about the 1800s that I can believe in, along with plenty of Native American stories of sightings of these animals, again, throughout the 1800s until the early 1900s. They go until about 1911 as well. There are stories of sightings of Ice Age fauna or megafauna in North America and in Siberia as well. So not only we're finding mammoths, but we're finding things that were supposedly extinct, like megafauna in North America, and I'm talking high up in Alaska and Canada, and in Siberia. Now, the next mammoth story that I could find with a date was from the Portland Press from November 28, 1896. Now, it publishes a long conversation with a Colonel C.F. Fowler, who was late of the Alaskan Fur and Commercial Company. Now, the Portland Press, they said this guy, Colonel C.F. Fowler, gave clear evidence that in the interior of Alaska, many mammoths still survive. They call them mastodons in the article. I'll say mastodons for this one. He first discovered among some fossil ivory collected by natives 2 tusks which showed evidence of being recently taken from an animal which carried them. They said he saw basically flesh and hair still on fresh tusks. On questioning the natives who sold it to him, he was surprised to receive a full description of an immense beast which had been killed by these very natives. A description fully identifying the animal as a mastodon. Colonel Fowler quotes Governor Swineford of Alaska as having also investigated this matter and as being satisfied that on the high plateaus of this country, large herds of mastodons or mammoths still roam unmolested by the natives who fear them greatly. The Alaska News also admits that the evidence of their existence is too strong to be denied. I'll talk about Alfred P. Swineford, Alaska guy, in just a second here. Before I get to that one, 1918, M.L. Gallon, French consulate, spoke with Hunter, and the man did not understand what a mammoth was, just that it looked like an elephant, and he said, "This thing that I saw is a very large elephant. I don't know what you're saying when you say the word mammoth. I'm saying I saw a very large, hairy elephant, basically." All right, let's get back to Alfred P. Swineford, because we're now up to that point. He served as governor of the District of Alaska from 1885 to 1889. He investigated numerous, and I'm talking, this guy loved his woolly mammoth stories, numerous reports of living woolly mammoths in Alaska during the gold rush era. That's right. When people went north hoping to strike it rich, they started seeing tracks and mammoths. You know, it's a lot like the logging companies when they moved into the Pacific Northwest and everybody started seeing Bigfoot right away. That's what was happening here in Alaska during the gold rush time. He said, after reviewing testimonies from indigenous people and settlers, he believed that herds of these creatures still existed in the high plateaus of the interior, specifically around the headwaters of the Snake River, and included his opinion in official reports to federal governments. That's right, to the federal government. That's right. This governor of Alaska, in his official reports to the federal government, often mentioned living mammoths. Now, word of his reports got out, and yeah, some newspapers made up stories to sell papers. Like in 1899, there was a tale about an Alaska mammoth that made global headlines when a man calling himself Henry Tuchman claimed he shot a live mammoth on that river. I already talked about the Tuchman dude, but It's coming up around the same time. Basically, it was, November 28th, 1896, the Portland Daily Press. They talk about a guy who had shot and killed a mammoth, and also talked about an Inuit trading outpost that had tons of mammoths. Let's see. He said the monster's body was covered with long, coarse fur. Basically, the stories just kept going on and on. It sold newspapers. It really did, but they were based on official reports from Swineford to the federal government. That's insane. Let's see. Here's one. I was in my first year of geological science at Birmingham University. Dr. Coop was my tutor. This is somebody talking about investigating this. And Dr. Coop was my tutor. He was a brilliant scientist and a great character. He organized the whole class to come along and help him with excavations. I have some photos somewhere on the PC. I'll never forget it, but years have made some of my memories cloudy. He said Dr. Cooper used to have a copy in the Wake of Serpents in the office and had Inuit peoples talking about mammoths. It's a really weird, really terribly worded thing. But basically, this guy's saying, this is not 1890s. This is 1920s. This guy knew somebody who was a teacher who talked about talking with Inuits about, trading with Inuits about mammoths. There's a Russian hunter named M.L. Galan who saw a pair of mammoths in 1918. This is his account in his own words. In the second year, I was exploring the taiga, or taiga, I don't know. I was very much struck to notice the tracks of a huge animal. I say tracks, for they were very larger than any of those I'd often seen of animals I knew well. It wasn't freezing yet. The snow had melted, and there were thick layers of mud in the clearings. I was in one of these big clearings when I staggered to see huge footprints pressed deep in the mud. There were 4 tracks, the tracks of 4 feet, the first 2 about 4 meters from the second pair, which were bigger in size. Then the track suddenly turned east and went into the forest of middling-sized elms. I followed the tracks for days and days. Sometimes I could see where the animals had stopped at some grassy clearing and had gone on forever eastwards. Then one day, I saw another track almost exactly the same. It came from the north and crossed the first one. It looked to me as if they had trampled about all over the place for several hundred meters, as if they had been excited or upset by their meetings. Then the 2 animals set out marching eastward, one following some other one 20 meters behind the other, both tracks mingling and plowing upon the earth together. I followed them for days and days, thinking that perhaps I should never see them, and also a bit of afraid, for indeed I didn't feel I was big enough to face such beasts alone. One afternoon, it was clear enough from the tracks that the animals weren't far off. The wind was in my face, which was good for approaching them without them knowing I was there. All of a sudden, I saw one of the animals quite clearly, and now I must admit I really was afraid. I had stopped among some young saplings. It was a huge elephant with big white tusks, very curved. It was a dark chestnut color as far as I could see. It had fairly long hair on the hind quarters, but seemed very much shorter on the front. I must say I had no idea there were such big elephants. It had huge legs and moved very slowly. I've only seen elephants in pictures, but I must say that even from this distance, I could never have believed any beast could be so big. The second beast was around. I saw it only a few times among the trees. It seemed to be the same size. That's insane. That's from 1918. Again, we're getting into like modern times as far as I'm concerned. All right. This next one is kind of out of order. I will tell you this right away. Kurt here. This is me talking. This next one's out of order. But I placed it here because of when it was actually written about. You'll see in a second. It'll make sense. It's from a fur trader and a surveyor named David Thompson. He lived from 1770 to 1857. Now, this guy, David Thompson, collected oral stories of mammoths in the Rocky Mountains, but the memoir in which he was mentioned, in which he mentioned this, was not actually published until 1916, which is why I'm placing it at this point in the episode. I'm trying to keep these roughly the same time frame, right? I'm going chronologically. So even though he was from the 1770s or 1850s, he lived from the 1770s to the 1850s, The memoir in which this was written about was not published until 1916. He said he first heard rumors of mammoths on September 28th, 1807. The old chief and others related that in the woods of the mountains there's a very large animal of about the height of 3 FMs and great bulk. I don't know what an FM is. About the height of 3 FMs and great bulk that never lies down, but in sleeping always leans against a large tree to support its weight. They say that it has no joints in the mid of his legs, but they're not sure as they've never killed any of them, and by this account, they are rarely or never seen. This is no doubt some animal of the nurse's fables, as they cannot say that they have never seen at least the remains of a dead one. He's talking about a mammoth. I'm going to keep moving on. He found more mammoth stories in January 1811 near the Athabasca River in the Rockies. We are now entering the defiles of the Rocky Mountains by the Athabasca River. Strange to say, here is a strong belief that the haunt of the mammoth is about this defile. I questioned several. None could positively say they had seen them, but their beliefs I found firm and not shaken. All I could say is, did not shake their beliefs in his existence. Reports from old times made the head branches of this river and the mountains in this vicinity the abode of one or more very large animals, low of which I never appeared to give credence, for these reports appeared to arise from the fondness of the marvelous so common to mankind. I'm going to skip ahead. This is really long. To my oath, I could never assert nor deny its existence, for many hundreds of miles of the Rocky Mountains are yet unknown, and through the defiles by which we pass, distant 120 miles from each other, we hasten our march as much as possible. The hunters have all traversed this extent of the country in all directions, and this animal has been seen. All right. His stories got out. Newspapers again caught on. They loved the mammoth stories. There were a bunch of sightings of large unknown animals in the Rockies because of this. In the following year, in the Edinburgh magazine, the Scots magazine, based on the reports of fur traders. It's basically his story. They just kind of embellished a little bit. I'm not giving any credence to those. So let's keep on moving forward. We're at 1920. A French diplomat stationed in Vladivostok relayed a trapper's account of a giant shaggy elephants, plural, in the Siberian taiga, right there. He said that the trappers are saying, we see them regularly. There's more than one. Then in 1927, an American explorer named Anthony Fiala planned an expedition to the Siberian taiga again in search of the live mammoths. He said he first heard about them during the First World War when he had met a man who was traveling in Siberia, found that his local guides would not go with him to a certain wooded area. When asked why, they drew a picture of a mammoth. So again, up to that date, 1927, people still saw mammoths, still going. 1934, anthropologist William Duncan Strong wrote about discussions of American elephants from Quebec and Labrador in an article of the American Anthropologist. He said several Naskapi informants had described a vanished animal. Oh, this one's going to kill me. The Kachitokusk. Nope. Kachitousk, to whom was a sort of elephant. When asked to describe that thing, the Naskapi people said he was very large, had a big head, large ears, and a large teeth, long nose with which he hit people. His tracks in the snow were described in stories as large and round. One Indian who'd seen pictures of a modern elephant said he thought it was near or like the Kachitoskoof. Older Indians questioned were unanimous in declaring that such had always been the description of this beast so far as they had any knowledge. So basically, yeah, this thing still exists, 1934. He also quoted a legend communicated to him by fellow anthropologist Frank G. Speck, who collected from the Penobscot Indians of Maine. The story said there was a legend of the snowy owl, who was said to have killed large, long-toothed animals. Now, the snowy owl is not an owl. It is a Native American. He saw what he seems to be hills without vegetation, moving slow. I'm gonna skip this. It's boom. Basically, it's a story of a Native American who was a legend, basically a legend hunter, and he killed a mammoth. I mean, he describes it as a mammoth. It's crazy weird. Shouldn't have happened. There's no elephants in Maine for this person to have said that. But anyhow, moving forward, we're going to keep on keeping on. Archaeologist David Boyle referred to somewhat vague traditions among the Ojibwa and Iroquois of, quote, a large animal that once ranged the forest. So strong was it that it was able to crush its trees that stood in its path. Once he started talking to them, they described an elephant-like animal, and he found that this elephant-like animal were told to him by the Iroquois, the Wyandots, the Tuscaroras, the Ojibwa, and others. Indians of Massachusetts had a legend about walking haystacks, which were once seen moving down the coast of Martha's Vineyards. Giant hairy animals, if you can't figure that one out. The Micmacs of Nova Scotia reported mammoths in the best description possible. They describe a freaking mammoth. Not even a question, not like moving haystacks, a freaking mammoth. And that's from the Micmacs of Nova Scotia. It's bizarre, man. And again, not like 300 years ago we would see no, they're talking about in those times, modern times. Let's move forward to 1944. Pilots that were going from Alaska to Moscow, saw a herd of mammoths migrating. 1944. They looked down from their planes when they're traveling from Alaska to Moscow. Boom, a herd of mammoths. During World War II, Alaskan bush pilots and servicemen would often talk about spotting elephant-like creatures from their planes in the remote valleys around that same area of Alaska. According to one rumor from 1940s, military pilots flew over the dense taiga in the Yucatay, and spotted a small herd of animals very similar to woolly mammoths. 1948, a Soviet pilot came forward saying he saw a herd of mammoth-like dark shapes moving below his aircraft. Clear as day. 1948. 1956. Headmistress of a small village school near the Taz River encountered a mammoth in the river while out picking mushrooms. She said the animal came within 10 meters of her, and it was a woolly mammoth. Crazy cool. Let's see. Vladimir Pushkarev, September 1962, said that a large hairy animal with a large nose and tusk had occasionally been seen by local hunters before the Russian Revolution. Pushkarev's informant also claimed to have personally seen large footprints the size of a basin 10 years previously from 1962. According to other sources, Yucatan hunter named Nikolai Damon told a party of geologists in 1982 that he had come across a series of tracks the size of a household basin on the banks of the Cristaya River. He followed the tracks for about a kilometer until they disappeared into the forest. At the edge of the woods, he noticed a large tuft of very long brown fur hanging from a sharp branch. Dude, this is 1982. Where's that large fur? Why can't we test that? The same source state that two hunters came across similar tracks, oval-shaped traces, about 70 centimeters long, about 70 centimeters long by 40 wide, with a step of 4 meters near a forest in 1985. But that's jumping ahead. I'm going to keep to the timeline. We're actually at 1978. I jumped ahead a little bit, but that's because the story started in 1962. Sorry. 1978. A similar story happened to a group of people in the Indigirka River in the Yucatay. They claimed that one early morning they woke up to about a dozen mammoths calmly drinking from the rivers, and separately Soviet geologist in 1978 in the same area came upon a dozen colossal, hairy mammoths drinking from the Indigirka River before the creatures vanished into the forest. So we're already in 1978. I know I spoiled it a little bit. We were up till 1985 a minute ago, but we're at 78. They're still seeing groups of mammoths, about a dozen. And not only the same people, but now we've got Soviet geologists, we've got hunters, we've got people just backpacking. In 1982, Soviet science journalist Yaroslav Kirillovich Golovnov, published a letter he received from an Albert Moskvin of Krasnodar, who lived with the Mari people in the it's in the autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic, now the Mari El Republic in European Russia, who described the mammoth based on interviews with local people. So, 1982, the locals in this area of the Krasnodar, these Mari people, clearly called an animal Abda. They claim Abda still exists, though its numbers have dwindled. They move in herds or weddings of 4 to 5 individuals. They defend their calves from blizzards by forming circles and habitually raked lichen into heaps using their tusks. Like elephants, the Abda carry out funerals for dead Abda. That's right, eyewitnesses say that the herd of a fallen mammoth tears the hair off and undermines the earth under it until it sinks into the ground. They throw pieces of earth over it and stamp on the graves. It's a freaking elephant, man. Elephants do funerals. They're saying mammoths, these Abda, yes, do funerals. These locals also say the Abda was kind and affectionate, but if provoked by people, would become aggressive. That sometime before the Russian Revolution, a herd of angry mammoths, which destroyed buildings and fences for several days, had forced the inhabitants of Lower Shapi and Azakavo to move to the new village of Medvedisky. I'm burning out on Russian names here, people. According to the Mari, mammoths did not leave visible tracks as the long hair on their ankles obscured any traces left behind. We're in the 80s, man. 1980s. People are still seeing mammoths in Siberia. Let's see, 1982. A Soviet science journalist received a letter from Far Eastern Europe containing sightings of mammoths by locals. Again, the mammoths were called Abda. 1982. Then, 1989. A hunter saw 2 groups of 3 mammoths in that same area. Gold prospectors working near a tributary of that same river, the Indigirka, whatever, doesn't matter, don't care, I'm burning out here. They saw a herd of mammoths as well. We're already up to 1989. I think Saved by the Bell was already off the air by this point. People are still seeing mammoths. Wait, I got to find out. Saved by the Bell. Yep, 1989. Boy, wow. How do I know that fact? Now, debunk time. We're getting to debunk time, people. In 2012, there was a viral video that showed a mammoth in Siberia. It was walking in the water. It was supposedly either taken in 2012 or in 1943 and only released in 2012. Shocker. It was bad CGI nonsense. It was actually taken from a History Channel cryptid show. Then they doctored the footage to make it look old. But boy, howdy, was it a huge viral sensation in 2012. But it's fake. And it led me down rabbit holes of watching bad mammoth videos after bad mammoth videos on YouTube. I couldn't find any that I thought were relevant or even possibly relevant enough for this episode. So, that 1989 sighting is the latest, smallest grain of salt kind of sighting. But still, we made it up to 1989 people are still seeing mammoths. Not one, but a species of mammoths. So I wanted to check and see how small of a herd or how small of a amount of creature could there be to be a viable population. And it turns out that, yeah, if you have 20 to 50 of something, you could have a viable species. It can procreate and keep going. There is still possibilities, man. Now, there are a couple of bigger grain of salts of stories from like the 2000s. So it's not inconceivable to think that these things are still alive and hiding in the vastness of Siberia and even Alaska, where people just don't go. When I looked for that Sheridan Bachimachnik route, I was shocked how like nothing Siberia is. It's just, I mean, I knew Siberia was huge and vast and just, you know, nothing, no people, just land. But it's insane on Google Earth to go and see just how vast these mountains and valleys and forests and no humans around at all. It really is easy, for me anyway, to think that, yeah, 20 mammoths could be right there and we would never, ever know. Again, it's a stretch because you would think by this point there'd be some Starlink satellite or something that could track the migration patterns of ginormous mammoth-type animals, but we're not looking for them, so maybe that's why we're not finding them. We're not looking for them. There's no humans going there still to this day. Sure, with the climate change and global warming, there's a good chance that people are going to start going to those areas more and more, but as of right now, it's not happening. All righty, so I said I was going to get back to the pyramids, and I didn't want to lie, so real quick. Speaking of the pyramids and mammoths, there is an Egyptian painting in the tomb of Rekhmire that shows Egyptians walking with a pygmy mammoth and bear. This pygmy mammoth is really, really, really woolly looking. It is not a pygmy elephant. It is a freaking pygmy mammoth. And it comes up to the man's waist. And the people in the painting are thought to be Syrian traders carrying objects like tusks. So this thing is real. This painting is in the tomb of Rekhmire. You can easily see it. You can easily Google it and find it. It doesn't look like an elephant. It's brown and hairy. It looks like a tiny little, pygmy woolly mammoth. And some people think that a population of dwarfed elephants seem to have lingered on in isolation on the Greek island of Tylos, and they might, and might is the big word in this sentence, might have been pygmied dwarf mammoths. Now, remember way back to the beginning of this episode when I was talking about island shrinking in the beginning, that it did happen. Mammoths did shrink down in size as their habitat shrank, and right before they died. But it does happen. Island shrinking does happen. That's how species stay around when their habitats get smaller. So, yeah. Is there a possibility that there is an Egyptian painting in the tomb of Rekhmire that shows a pygmy mammoth? It sure as hell looks like it. In 1994, this guy named Baruch Rosen, he suggested that due to the tusk size and the skull shape, that Egyptian painting mammoth showed a dwarf mammoth. That's right. Besides numerous cave paintings of mammoths and humans found all over the world, here we have a tomb painting of a possible pygmy mammoth. Again, I gotta say, to me, and me alone, it looks like a mammoth and not just like a bad drawing of a tiny elephant. It's bizarre. But again, no, I do not think mammoths were used to build the pyramids. I just had to get that in before I finished the episode because I teased you about it at the beginning of this episode an hour and 40-some minutes ago. Yeah, what do you guys think? Do you think mammoths survived? Now, I think that it could very well have been that the mammoths survived until like the 1800s and then have since died out. But it does seem that people are still seeing mammoths well into the 1980s at least, 1990s, and even some possibly in the 2000s, early 2000s. Again, it just wouldn't surprise me too much that there are still small herds in Siberia. And if there are, leave them alone. And if there's not, well, it won't matter because we'll have cloned mammoths soon enough. One way or another, I'm petting a freaking mammoth. All right, that about does it for this week's episode of Paranormal Almanac. Once again, I'm your host, Kurt Sandvig. Thank you so much for a monster mammoth episode. They're not monsters. Not a monster.